Hey, so I just took this road trip to Canada. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to tell you all about it. So the reason I wanted to do this trip was because today is actually my 26th birthday. And I took this trip a couple of weeks ago. So it was sort of a early birthday gift to me, I guess, or birthday trip. Um, but it's not just my 26th birthday, it's also my last day of obligated military service. So 8 years ago, when I was 18, on my 18th birthday, I joined the Marine Corps. And a lot of people don't know this, but when you join the military, your contract is not just whatever 4 years or whatever you signed up for. It's 8 years, no matter what. No matter what the contract says, it's as far as your active duty time, you are on the hook for 8 years from the day that you sign your contract. So that means even if you're out of the military and you're living in the civilian world, you're still on the hook. Like, they can call you back if they need you. And given everything that's been kind of going on in the world over the past forever, it's sometimes hard to sleep at night knowing that, you're on the hook for whatever's happening off in this distant country. And so to be here now on the last day of that is really nice. A big weight off of my shoulders. In anticipation of this day and to kind of celebrate it, I was like, maybe I should do something big. Maybe I should do something huge. And I'm back in school now, so I have breaks. So I was like, yeah, sure. I have a whole week. Why don't I just hop in my truck, my Ford Ranger, and see how far down the road she can take me? And so that's exactly what I did. And so I have some notes here because I tend to go off on tangents a lot. I'm kind of a math guy. Okay, so the first day of the trip, I left from my house here in Parker, Colorado. Left at about 6 in the morning. That was what time my girlfriend got up for work, and I was too excited to go back to sleep after she left. So I got up and drove. I didn't really bring very much with me on this trip. I brought like a few changes of clothes. And that was basically it. So yeah, I just kind of took off. I made my first stop at Buc-ee's, which this is my sixth time going there, and I'm kind of over it. I feel like it's kind of overrated. The food's really not that good. It's my opinion. But I sat on my tailgate and I ate this bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit that was okay. But I watched the sunrise over the mountains. That was cool. And then I continued on my way. I didn't film very much of day one because if you've ever driven through northern Colorado and all of Wyoming, it's not much there to film. So I stopped in Casper, Wyoming, because I've always been curious about like what they do up there. And the answer is nothing. There's nothing in Casper. I was very unnerved while I was walking around because all you can hear is just this wind howling through the streets, and like all these buildings are empty, and there's nobody around, and there was like speakers off in the distance that were playing like covers of popular songs. I think the city probably put those there to make it seem like more lively, but it ended up just adding to this kind of uncanny valley effect that I felt throughout this city. And day one was just like this really, it was a kind of a weird feeling because it's like, this is a trip that I've thought about taking for a really long time. I've always dreamed about doing something exactly like this, where it's like you just get in your truck and just go and see how far you get and see what's interesting along the way. And so to be finally doing it was a surreal kind of feeling. But it was also exciting because it's like I can just go. I can just keep going, and I stop whenever I want. And seeing all these places I've never seen before. I went into Montana. Never been to Montana before. It was a really beautiful state. And there was mountains and there was crazy wind, and I was like having to fight to stay in the lane because of how the wind was, and really cool. I also learned that up until fairly recently, Montana actually didn't have speed limits on their portions of interstate, which seems insane to me. But yeah, it was 80-mile-an-hour speed limit the whole way through, and I'll tell you, I did not see a single Montana license plate that was not going at least 90. So I stopped for the night in town of Livingston, Montana, which is one of those. It kind of struck me as one of those like kind of travel stop towns along interstates where it's like the city center seems to be like the exit, like right around the exit where you've got like the McDonald's and the Loves and all the hotels and everything. And then you just kind of have like a small town around the perimeter of this. At least that's my impression of them. But so I made it a point to kind of walk around a little bit, which I didn't record much of that. I think I took a picture maybe of the view. It was a nice mountain view, but it obviously was not very walkable at all. I really did not feel safe walking around, especially crossing the streets. Because I was like, I don't think anyone's expecting to see people walking around in this area. So I was a little, weary about that, but there wasn't much going on. I mean, there was like apartments and houses and stuff like that. But I've always been curious about like what is kind of out there beyond the, like I said, little travel stop. Yeah, so I stayed the night there at a Comfort Inn in Livingston. That's personally my hotel of choice. With the hotels, though, I was trying to keep it under $50 a night. I wasn't able to do that every night, but across the whole trip, I kept the average under 50, so I still came in under budget. And at the end of the video, I'll talk about all the budget and everything like that. But yeah, I tried to keep the hotels as cheap as possible. I normally, on a trip like this, would have preferred to camp overnight, but because I was going into Canada, I couldn't bring any like self-defense items with me, so I didn't feel comfortable camping by myself if I don't have any protection of any kind. So I opted to stay in hotels instead. But this hotel was pretty nice for $50. They had like a swimming pool, and they gave me 2 beds when I only asked for 1. There was breakfast included. It was actually... Oh, your claws are sharp. It's actually pretty good breakfast. But I guess that takes us into the next day, day 2, which I think was probably the most eventful day of the trip. So I once again left at 6 a.m. I think I sort of figured that it'd be best to leave right before the sun comes up so that I would have as much daylight as possible. Because I didn't really want to be driving in the dark, because to me that felt like it defeated the purpose of taking a trip like this, because you can't see anything, so you're kind of just driving for no reason. But yeah, so I left my hotel in Montana and took this route. I tried to prioritize taking routes that avoided interstates just so I could kind of see, different parts of the country. I mean, I've never been to Montana, like I said, but, I feel like interstates kind of just fly over these small towns and communities, and, you get to see maybe the big cities, but outside of that, you just see a lot of concrete. So I decided, I'll take state highways and stuff whenever I can. And so I took this rural route through Montana, and it was actually really awesome. Um, I'm really glad I made that choice. I found myself on this rural highway where there was just nobody around, nobody else on the road, and it was just open farmland with just like mountains all around, but way off in the distance, close enough to where you could see them and like really like be in awe of them, but far away enough to where it's like I still feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere. But it was cool. And I would kept pulling off to the side of the road to, just kind of sit on my tailgate and watch the sun come up a little bit more. And like I said, these state highways, they don't fly over the towns, they go right through them. And so you get to kind of, cruise through these little small towns along the way and just kind of, I always like to, when I drive through a small town or drive through a place that really strikes me as being quite different from where I live, I like to kind of envision like what's life like here? What would my life be like if I lived here? Just kind of have a different experience. Like, like this highway took me through the Lewis and Clark National Forest, which was beautiful. And I passed through some small towns that were kind of tucked away in the woods. And it's like, what is life like in a town like that? Like, because there's not a grocery store here. So it's like, do you just drive like once a month out 40 minutes to the nearest grocery store and like that's how you stock up, or are you growing your own stuff? Or I don't know. This is stuff that I get curious about, and sometimes I do like to check out these small towns, drive around, see what the houses look like and all that. Another thing I noticed driving through these kind of middle of nowhere towns is that these gas stations that are out in these rural areas tend to have a huge energy drink selection. I found this energy drink called Ziants that I used to drink while I was in the Marine Corps, and I haven't seen it anywhere since, but this random gas station in rural Montana had it, and it tasted just as terrible as I remember. So nothing much really happened from then on until I got up to the border. A lot of nothing, a lot of farmland. Then I got to the border. I think they were a little suspicious of me. My plan maybe didn't make sense to them, that I was just literally trying to drive as far as I could. So they were asking me a lot of questions. They did search my truck. They found some pepper spray that I guess I didn't realize you couldn't take that into Canada, so had to do a bunch of paperwork because they had to confiscate it. But I felt like I got through without much of an issue. They were nice, friendly. They were grilling me, definitely, but they were nice about it. So but eventually I got through the border. And a lot of people talk about how they get culture shock when they go to a foreign country, but when you go to Canada, it's like the only thing that changes is the cows start speaking French. And everything else is exactly the same. And it's like, okay, speed limit signs are in kilometers per hour. Highways are a little bit cleaner. Everything else seems to be the same, though. So I made my first stop in Canada at the town of Lethbridge. It's kind of a cool name, I think. But there wasn't much going on in that town. But I stopped at a Safeway, grabbed some random Canadian snacks. I just wanted to make sure that my credit card would work in Canada, which luckily it did. And my cell phone plan worked as well, which was nice. I had data and everything. And I also went to McDonald's. Anytime I visit a foreign country, I like to see what they have at McDonald's that's different. And Canada had poutine, which was terrible, and this chicken wrap thing that was kind of weird, but it's better than the poutine. Canadian food definitely has some of that like British influence. It's kind of like beans on toast. Like they're like, oh, I'm gonna put gravy and cheese curds on the fries. And it's like, what? And so, yeah, I kept driving along these Canadian highways, which, like I mentioned, they're a little bit cleaner. They were really nice. I really loved all of the highways I drove on in Canada because they're not like U.S. interstates where they're just, like I said, flying over. It doesn't feel like you're on this just giant concrete, like super highway. It's like you're just driving down a road that is connecting these communities, and you get to drive right through them. You know, you're not just on an overpass. You're driving through, you know, the highway becomes the main street of the town, and you get to see everything. You get to see all the restaurants and the stores, and you know, it makes it a trip like this is a lot more satisfying on a road like that, because then you don't have to like plan ahead as much, because it's like, oh, I can just, whenever I get to the next town, I can just see what they have, and if I want to stop there, right? But yeah, super nice. Another interesting thing I noticed was that a lot of the road signs are in English and French, and I do speak a little bit of French, and I thought it was kind of odd. I noticed that a lot of times the English and French were not like direct translations, and there were a few times where the French translation actually provided more information than the English one. And it was like, that seems kind of weird, especially considering that I think this part of Canada is mostly speaks English anyways. You know, like I was under the impression that the whole Canada being French thing was more just Canada trying to be different. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's never struck me as like, oh, a lot of people in Canada do speak French. You know, like I wouldn't think like here in the US where it's like half the people here speak Spanish. It's like, I don't think it's like that in Canada. I think it's just like, oh, there's this specifically one province that just kind of wants to be different. And so they like really speak French with this kind of weird nasally accent that I've never been a fan of. So I've always found it kind of annoying. So then I got into Calgary, which was my first time in the trip having any sort of traffic, but it was very light, especially considering I got there around rush hour. And I ended up staying at the worst hotel I've ever stayed at in my life. It was $30 a night. It was Canada's Best Value Inn. There was a lot of signs all over the place. They were making a very big deal about how they weren't responsible if your car got broken into, which in hindsight, I really don't know why I took that risk. I should have just stayed somewhere else. Like if my car got stolen in Canada, I would have been so screwed because I just brought my passport card, which you can't use that for airplanes. You can only use it for land crossings. So it's like I had to have my truck. So I in hindsight, would not have taken that risk. But, you know, I was fine, luckily, and I learned from that. It was a terrible motel. The front desk was behind these giant metal bars. I have never seen that before, and I've stayed at some pretty seedy places. I've seen like bulletproof glass, but just like the metal bars, like at that point, they're not even attempting to like present themselves as like nice or hospitable or professional. They're just like, you know, like, yeah, we know you're here to buy a room that you're probably not going to be doing super legal activities in. Just give the money and we'll give you the key. Like, but I got to my hotel and it was still about like 15 minutes outside of the city. So I was like, okay, I'm going to walk to the light rail station and kind of see what Calgary's public transit is all about. I've heard good things about it. So I took that into the city and it was nice. It was clean and pretty cheap. Tickets were about $250 US both ways, which was nice. And yeah, I got off in the downtown area. I walked around for a little bit. I didn't really know where to go. I did look up beforehand, like, what is there to do in Calgary? Most of what came up didn't really appeal to me. I don't really like doing like super touristy stuff. Like they have this big tower you can go to the top of and all that. I don't like to do stuff like that because it doesn't really feel like it's my own experience. It feels like I'm paying to have like this curated experience, which is exactly what it is. it's like I don't really want that. I want to like have my own experience, and ideally not have to spend much money on it. Um, so I ended up walking to Chinatown because I heard that they had this like ginger beef thing that they are known for that Calgary like invented. Like I would think ginger is a pretty standard ingredient in a lot of Asian cuisine, but I guess nobody had ever put ginger and beef together before Calgary. Um, but I couldn't find it anywhere on the menus. I mean, I was just going based off the menus that they like put outside the restaurant. You know, we ended up going to this like Japanese restaurant that had this. I got this shrimp tempura udon that was so delicious. Like I really underestimated how cold Canada was going to be. And so I was freezing. It was like 26 degrees outside and I was like freezing. I packed because back home we were going through a heat wave here in Colorado. And so I was packing for the heat wave. And then I get up north and it was like freezing and I just had hoodies. So having this nice warm soup was really nice. Really hit the spot. And it was only $15 US. I feel like that's an insane amount of food. But yeah, then I kept walking around. I found this river called the Elbow River, which is a cool name, and walked across this cool bridge that had these lion statues on it, which I think that means like prosperity or something in Chinese culture. I don't know. Why would I know? And then I walked up to this park on the hill that had this really cool view over the city, and it was like that's a park that they put there specifically for people to sit there and like ponder things. And so I was like, I'm gonna ponder a little bit. So I pondered, and you know, day 2, I think if I were to encapsulate it in one word, it would be like surreal. You know, like day 1, it was like felt weird. It's like, oh, I'm finally doing this thing that I've been wanting to do forever, but it hadn't like sunk in yet that I was actually doing it because I was still like, I was not super far from home yet. But it's like day 2, I was like, oh wow, I'm really here, and I'm in this foreign country, which from a distance doesn't look very different from the US, but it's like when you look closely, there are a lot of differences. Like all of the like one thing that struck me was that all of these buildings have company names on them that I have never heard before. And so to me, they kind of sound like made up names. And so it sort of felt like I was in like a video game, like GTA, like a video game recreation of an American city where, oh, we just came up with all these random company names so that we don't get like sued by an actual company for using their name or whatever. And like everyone obviously speaks English. A lot of people look the same. There's a little bit more diverse in America, I noticed. But the other thing that really threw me off was like everybody seemed very nice and very friendly and very happy, which it's not like that. I feel like in the US in general, there's more of a stress. People just seem stressed all the time from my observations, at least. So that was weird. And I also noted that I felt very safe walking around that city. Like there wasn't any points. Normally when I walk around an American city, I'll feel unsafe at some point. Like I'll walk past something where it's like I probably don't want to be in this area for very long. Or so yeah. Then I walked back and I took the light rail back, and yeah, called it a night. That was a pretty eventful day. For me, that was a pretty eventful day. Did a lot. So day 3, I woke up at 8. I had set an alarm the night before, or no, I had made an alarm the night before for 6 in the morning. I didn't set it though, and so I woke up at 8, which ended up working out. But I made my first stop at Tim Hortons because I feel like that's just something you have to do in Canada. I got a double, which is a coffee with 2 creams and 2 sugars, which I thought was kind of gross. It was just too much. It was more than I thought 2 creams and 2 sugars would have been, because that's normally what I put, well, I normally do 1 sugar in my coffee, but it was mostly the cream. It was just like too much. I don't know. Maybe it's like metric system. Like, like, oh, by 1 cream, that means 1 liter, and 1 sugar is 1 kilo of sugar. I got a maple donut and a pecan butter tart, which just way too much sugar to start the day. That was crazy. What was I thinking? What I will say though is, so all of this stuff, $4.75 American, $4.75, right? This was $7. I got this for $7. But at Tim Hortons you get a coffee, donut, really sugary tart, $4.75. Then I got onto the Trans-Canada Highway. Really was very excited to drive on this highway because I'm like, if you only have one highway that goes across your whole country, what is that like? I thought it was going to be like a super highway, but it wasn't. It was the same as the other highways I had been driving on, where it was just like most of the way was just a 2 to 4 lane road. And wasn't divided for a lot of it, which that's a big thing in the US with our interstates, is they're divided highways, meaning, you have lanes that are separated to go in each direction. So there's like a barrier in between the lanes, right? Wasn't like that for most of the Trans-Canadian Highway. And it did where you slow down to 30 kilometers an hour and cruise through the main street of all these towns. Really awesome. I got to Banff, and it really threw me off because I didn't realize that the highway actually goes through the national park. I thought it was just going to go near the national park, but it goes right through the middle of it. And so it's like I got to experience, and there was like 2 other national parks, I think. And so it's like I got a handful of national parks for free because I was just driving through. I did stop though in the town of Banff, which I guess I was supposed to purchase a park pass to be allowed to stop. Like that, like you enter the park for free, but you have to have a pass if you're going to stop at any point. Otherwise, you're just driving on the highway. I don't know. I didn't buy a pass. Peter Carney or whatever your name is, the prime minister, you can bill me, send me an invoice and I'll pay up. Cause I do feel a little bad about that, but, stopped in Banff. It was just a little ski town tourist shop place. I did buy some souvenirs though, so I'm definitely not above that, but, it was really pretty though. Like the Canadian Rockies, who would have thought, like, it just felt like every turn that I went, it was like this highway was kind of windy, and it felt like every turn there was just something more impressive than what I had just seen. And it was like these jagged peaks, and it was like the perfect day for visibility. Like you have these like just like light cloud coverage areas along the peaks that just added even more to this just like majesty, because it's like you can see like the clouds give you like this visual reference of like how tall the thing you're looking at is. Like it's so tall that a huge chunk of it is above the clouds, right? Like that to me just kind of messes with my head. Another thing I noticed while I was driving through these mountain roads on this Trans-Canadian Highway was they had a railroad that was also running through this mountain pass. And that was just incredible to me, like to see, like to think about the engineering that must have gone into being able to build a railroad through this crazy mountain pass. At one point I actually pulled off just to kind of look at the train a bit more. And it looked like it was just carrying all of Canada's economy. Like they had these big cars of lumber, and these giant maple syrup bottles, and like, snow bricks to build igloos with, and it was like just watching a whole country's economy, GDP in motion. So I stopped in town of Golden, British Columbia at an A&W. I know that that's an American thing, but I can't remember the last time I've seen one in America. I can tell you I've definitely never eaten at one. But in Canada, these things are everywhere. I saw more A&Ws than I did McDonald's in Canada. They are everywhere. I don't know what it is. I figured I would give it a shot to see maybe this is like some incredible burger. It wasn't. It was okay. I was like, and the weirdest part was the name of the burger. Like, I guess they have this whole thing where it's like it's a burger family. So they have the Papa Burger and the Mama Burger and the Uncle Burger. And the one that I got was the Teen Burger that had a teen sauce on it. I'm not joking. That's what it's called. And it wasn't very good. You know, maybe Canadians just don't really understand burgers. That's what I find, you know, when you leave America, the further you get from America, the worse the burgers are, because it's like these people don't have experience actually making cheeseburgers the correct way, and it's like they just do everything a little bit wrong. Like they over season the meat, and they use a type of cheese that doesn't really make sense, that doesn't melt super well. And then it's like they kind of twist the ingredients, like, oh, instead of tomatoes, I'm going to put pickled radishes. And, oh, instead of lettuce, let's put cabbage. And it's like the end result is just off, and it just tastes gross. I feel like maybe Canada's just a little out of touch with their burger, like, ball knowledge. I don't know. So I stopped for the night in Kelowna, British Columbia. Not much going on there, unfortunately. It was just kind of there's a lot of, I think maybe I just stayed in the wrong part, but it was just a lot of like commercial stuff, like office buildings and stuff. It was really not a very nice place to stay in terms of scenery. But for dinner, I went to this place called Boston Pizza, which I know is kind of a Canadian thing. And I got a carbonara pizza, which I've never put those two things together in my head before, but it was really good. And I walked to the gas station, the Petro Canada, to get a drink. But yeah, I got to this Petro Canada gas station, and the guy was like, oh, would you like to sign up for a Petro Canada membership? And I was like, no, actually, I'm from the US. And he's like, oh, okay, then probably wouldn't do you any good. And I paid for my thing and left. And I was like, I don't know why I never thought about it, because like one thing I hate is when I go to a store, like I go to Bass Pro Shops, and they're like, oh, would you like to sign up for our credit card? You can get points on every purchase, and we'll price match, and you can have my lunch, and you can go home to my family, and maybe my son will call you dad. And it's like, I don't want that. I didn't come to Bass Pro Shops to get a credit card. I came to Bass Pro Shops to get bullets or stuff and cool clothes. It was like, why have I never thought of that? Like, just be like, oh, I'm from Canada. And then they just immediately stop, and they're like, oh, okay. Oh, I stayed at the La Quinta. It was nice. I'm not going to lie. It was too nice for me. Like, there's a certain point where it's like, I feel like I'm just kind of wasting my money on luxuries that I don't need. Like, like, for example, the breakfast, they had actual, like, plates and silverware, and they had a latte machine. Or as they would say in Canada, a latte machine. Lattes and Tim Hortons and polar bears and hockey. It's like, why? Why not just give me a paper plate, Like, everyone's literally dressed like they're still in their bedroom. Just give me a paper plate. Like, what? You're not going to trick me into thinking this is like the Ritz-Carlton. Anyways, day 3, I was like getting kind of tapped out. It's like I felt like I had seen so much. I had driven for like, I don't even know, probably close to 20 hours at this point. and I had just seen and done so much. I was like, my brain's kind of starting to get fried. Um, and the reason I stopped in Kelowna was because I didn't know if I was going to want to continue to Vancouver or turn back. And I think at this point, I was just feeling like I was just not sure. And I was like, I think I'm just going to stay in Kelowna. So it's like, it's close to the border, but it's also not too far from Vancouver. And I'll just see how I feel the next day. So I woke up on day 4 and yeah, I decided I was ready to head back. I was missing my cat and I was starting to worry that I was maybe spending too much money. And I was just like, I'm ready to go. And so I decided to head back. I stopped at a few different Canadian stores to buy snacks and stuff. Walmart, Canada, which is just as the same as a U.S. Walmart. I don't know why I stopped there. Real Canadian Superstore sounded authentic. Sport Check, which was like a Dick's Sporting Goods with a less weird name. Bulk Barn, which was it was like a store where they just have big bins of anything like pasta, candy, seasonings, spices, flour, rice. You just fill a bag with however much you want. It's like you don't know where people's hands have been though. I would not shop there. It's gross. Gross. Canadian Tire, which is like a Home Depot plus an auto parts store plus a sporting goods store. There's a lot of stores in Canada that just sell like everything. I don't know if I was like missing like some context or something, but it was like every store I went to, it was like you could just buy anything you wanted. Except for the specific thing that you came there to get. At least in my experience. But the other thing I thought was cool that I noticed was this brand called No Name. I've heard of it before, but I saw it like everywhere at these grocery stores. It's like this plain yellow packaging, and it's just called No Name or Sans Nom in French. Kind of neat. So yeah, then I continued on and made it to the U.S. border, which was a lot harder to get back into this country than it was to leave. The guy at the border was just grilling me. I had to go inside and he had me write down every address I went to in Canada, and he thoroughly searched my vehicle. And I was there for probably an hour. He had my passport, he had my keys. Nobody else was in there. It was just me that they had stopped. And so I presumed they were suspicious of what I was actually doing in Canada. And I was not like anxious or anything. I was just kind of annoyed because I was like, I guess I understand why it would be suspicious that you have this guy who shows up at the border by himself and claims to have just been driving and doing absolutely nothing else. Like that absolutely is like, okay, nobody does that. Why would you do that? But I was doing that. That's what I was doing. And I don't like when people don't believe me because I'm a truthful person. I don't lie very much. Maybe twist the truth a little bit, but I don't lie. I'm an honest guy. And so when people don't believe me, it kind of irks me because it's like I go out of my way to be honest. Don't you know that? But yeah, after about an hour, I made it across the border. And at that point, I was like, okay, now I'm really ready to go home. Like, that pissed me off. But I tried to kind of cool off a little bit, like, still enjoy the rest of my trip. Even though, like, that guy the guy at the border just made me feel really stupid, basically. Right? Like, just the way he looked at me when I told him what I was doing was like as if my trip that I was taking was like the dumbest thing he had ever heard of, which I really don't think. Like just going on a long drive, you know, you go on a long drive to clear your head. That's what I was doing. I was just making it take like almost a week. I don't think that that's that crazy or that stupid or whatever, but apparently Mr. GI Joe border guy thought that it was dumb. And so that made me feel like I was being kind of dumb. But then I realized, you know what? That guy's dumb because he sucks and his hair was stupid. So yeah, I was kind of in the middle of Washington. I was driving through the Colville Reservation. Then I went southeast, which was into the nothingness part of Washington, which was the most isolated I felt at any point in the trip, because I was on these highways that were in the middle of nowhere. Like there weren't even farms. It was just nothing. And there was nobody else on this road. And I love that because it's like there's no distractions. There's nothing competing for my attention. It's just me and the road and my thoughts and my podcast and Google Maps on my Apple CarPlay and, you know, checking myself out in the mirror. So there are still a few distractions. But it's like it just feels refreshing to go from the world we live in where we're just surrounded by screens and noise to just be in the middle of nowhere. It was cool. Yeah, a lot of nothingness until I got to LaGrange, Oregon, which is where I stayed the night. And this was probably my favorite hotel of the trip. It was the LaGrange Inn, because it wasn't too fancy, but it was like I felt safe. You know, it was definitely a step up from just like a motel. And there was a Denny's right there in the parking lot, and I went into the Denny's, and they had this deal that was you could get breakfast and chips and salsa and a drink for $10, which is the weirdest combination of food I've ever gotten from a restaurant. But it was $10, so of course I'm gonna do that. And yeah, then I went ahead and called it a night after that, and it was on to day 5. So day 5, I woke up and I was fully ready to go home, and I was like, I'm going to go home. Like I'm not gonna stop. This is gonna be the last day of the trip, which was a lofty goal because I had still 14, 15 hours of driving to go. But I took off, and then I very quickly got distracted driving through Oregon on I-84 because I noticed all these dirt roads going up into the hills, and I just had to pull off and check one out. And I drove like 5 miles down this dirt road, and there was absolutely nothing, and it was awesome. And I did pull out my little map on my iPad, and it was BLM land. So, you know, I wasn't like trespassing or anything. You don't want to do that in America. Unless you want to be on the other side of a wireless hole puncher. Right. So then I got back on the road. There's a lot more nothingness kind of as I went into Idaho, especially. Idaho was just terrible. I stopped at a Walmart to pick up a pillow, and just looking around, it was like everybody just looked kind of weird. And I got this pillow, and I was like, I didn't even buy a pillowcase because I ain't no liberal. I don't need a pillowcase. I just wanted a pillow so that I could, you know, when I get to a rest stop, I could take a nap or whatever, which is kind of what I did. Every couple hours, I stopped at a rest stop and took a nap. Then I got into Wyoming. The sun had gone down, and I was like, I'm gonna stop for the night because it's not really a point in driving through the night because it's like I'm trying to see stuff, you know. So I ended up just stopping at a rest stop, and I actually slept for probably 6 hours. It was the worst sleep. It was that sleep where it's like you wake up every few hours throughout the night and you don't feel like you really slept, but you did. Like Like it doesn't feel like you slept, but there's like 2 hours that you can't account for. So it's like you by process of elimination, you had to have been sleeping. But once the sun came up, I figured I would continue. And so I continued driving through Wyoming, which was actually really cool to watch the sunrise in Wyoming. It was like kind of surreal because there was just all these vivid colors and just nothing. It's just flat. Occasionally you get these like wind-swept little wooden buildings from a bygone era, probably. And it's like just seeing these crazy sunrise colors that are kind of projected onto these just like, leaning houses, prairie homes. It's cool. And I did pull off and check out some more dirt roads because I felt like it. So then I just kind of drove the rest of the way back home. I took some state highways through Colorado. It was pretty nice. Stopped at Buc-ee's again, decided to give them another shot. I got an iced coffee that tasted like iced dirt. And I got a breakfast burrito that was not good. And I was like, you know what, Buc-ee's? You're fired. So Buc-ee's is now blacklisted from my life. And so me and my family are not going to Buc-ee's anymore. Fool me 6 times, shame on me. Fool me 7 times, not going anymore. I've divorced Buc-ee's. And then I took C470 the rest of the way home, which is Denver's failed attempt at a beltway. They basically invested all this money into building this roadway, and they're like, hey guys, we're giving you a choice. You can either drive straight to your destination for free, or you can take a really long detour through the ugliest part of Colorado and pay a toll and get to your destination later. So, yeah, that road's kind of a waste. But I drove it home just to see what there was. Then I got back home and petted my cat. And that was the trip. And so now if you'll give me a moment to go off into my bedroom and grab my notebook, we'll talk a little bit about expenses and statistics. All right, let's get that on a tray. Nice. Okay, so grand total for the trip was $890.45, which is my budget for the trip was like $1,000. So cool. Gas was most of that. It was about $400 in gas. The cheapest gas price was $3.47 a gallon in Great Falls, Montana, and the highest was $5.49 in Warden, Washington, for an average fuel price of $4.48 a gallon. Not a good time to take a road trip in terms of geopolitics. So hotels came out to $257.67. That's $257.67. All right. Okay, we got it. You guys thought that was kind of cool. So that came out to about $50 a night, which, like I said, that was my budget. So cool, that worked out. Food was $189.01. So lip gloss and a penny. It came out to $34 a day, roughly, which for a vacation I feel like is pretty moderate to low. Souvenirs, that was probably about $50. The numbers didn't quite add up, right? But I literally bought like a sweater and like I didn't buy much in souvenirs, snacks. Overall, Canada was very cheap. Like, I didn't realize how much cheaper things would be in Canada compared to the US. You know, like that $5 for a bunch of stuff from Tim Hortons and um, everything was just like the $15 meal. It was like as I went through tallying up my expenses, I was just shocked to see like the US dollar value of what I was spending. And it's like that was crazy. That was a lot of, you know, a lot of stuff for not a lot of money, in my opinion. Um, so the total trip duration was 124 hours. That's from when I left my house to when I got back. That's not driving time. It was 48 hours of driving time, 3,080 miles total. So that meant 39% of the trip was spent driving. So you factor in sleep as well. And it's like that's not a lot of percentage spent doing stuff, which is maybe why, you know, border customs was a little iffy on my vacation that I supposedly took. And I also looked online. I found this calculator that gave like an average cost for a trip, and you would put in the details of your trip and it would like give you like an average estimate of how much it would cost. And that said like almost $1,400, which to me seems a little steep, but I came in at 64% of that. Granted, that 1,400 number was the average for Parker to Calgary and back, which is significantly shorter than the route I actually took because I took a big loop. So if we are to believe the averages, that means I really, you know, kept this trip to a pretty tight budget. You know, so I'm happy with that. And yeah, that was my little long drive that I took to clear my head. I hope you guys thought this was interesting to watch. If you didn't, sorry.